So how is the Senate preparing for all of this? Let's ask Republican Senator Bill Cassidy from the beautiful state of Louisiana. Senator, it's interesting how bias is perceived. Democrats who say Republicans are in the hip pocket of the president. But then, of course, you heard what Nancy Pelosi had to say on Bill Maher, and that goes unchecked. Allowing for that, though, how do you guys go the extra mile to prove this is how you do it without looking like you're going to do the president's bidding?
Yeah, so you look at the basic argument. Did the president withhold funds beyond a mandatory date of release to the Ukrainians? Now, of course, right now we know that he had to release it by the end of September. He released those funds by September the 12th. Now, there's going to be a lot of, I call it monkey dust. People throwing dust around, trying to distract from what is the crux of the issue. If we look at the crux and remain focused on that crux, then we'll establish whether or not the president did something illegal or not.
Do you want witnesses, especially there's been a big fuss over Lev Parnas, this confidant of Rudy Giuliani, now who's sort of spilling the beans on everybody. Wouldn't you want to just question him just to find out, wait a minute, what's going on here? We want to find out exactly where you're getting this, how you're getting this, that it would be in your interest, in the president's interest, to grill him.
Let's step back just a little bit, Neil, and recognize that what we have here is not just a trial, if you will. It's also a process of democracy. The House is supposed to build an impeachment case, send it to the Senate, which then judges that impeachment case. If you lower that threshold, the House can mash up anything and take this kind of messy ball and hand it to the Senate, and then hopefully stretch it out closer to an election cycle. We can then ask the Senate to build a case that the House did not do so. My bias so far is that the House should have built a case. If there's more information that they didn't include, why didn't you include it? But it's not our responsibility to build the case that you did not. We'll see. We'll have a vote on witnesses, and at that point the question will arise. But that's how I initially approach this. We shouldn't lower the threshold the House is required to achieve in order to impeach a president. I think that's what they're asking us to do.
But what if there are new developments, Senator, and whether you like it or not, you have to address them? This government accountability report that says the president acted illegally, violated the law when he was freezing military aid ever so briefly, but did do so, that the GAO said a faithful execution of the law does not permit the president to substitute his own policy priorities for those of Congress that it has enacted into law, or separately to weigh in on the Ukraine now launching an investigation as to whether our former ambassador there was indeed surveilled, or again, as I said at the outset, the part has his comments, that there's enough new going on that even if you don't get witnesses, at the very least, it could extend what I know Mitch McConnell seems to have intimated would be a quick impeachment trial. What do you think?
So again, I'm a doctor, so I just kind of focus on that critical thought, and that critical thought is, were funds released by the time that they're supposed to be released? What the GAO says actually is only an interpretation of events. It is, if you will, not a new development. Now, there may be new things. We'll have a vote upon witnesses, but I'll go back to what I also said earlier. We can't lower the threshold. If we lower the threshold of how this is going to work, whenever we have a president of one party and a House of Representatives of the other, we'll go from impeachment being something that happens 3 times in our nation's history to something that happens whenever there's a president of one party and a speaker of the other. We have to keep this threshold high. The House should build a case. Frankly, they had time to do it. They just chose not to exercise that time.
Are you saying that if some of your colleagues want witnesses, that's a big mistake?
No, I'm not saying that. We'll have a vote on that.
Okay.
And I think it'll become apparent as to what's going on by then. And
so if it rules that all you need are 50,
I'm
sorry, sir. If all it takes is 51 senators to approve witnesses, and we go that route. I talked to Senator Van Hollen of Maryland on this issue, who said that, be careful what you wish for kind of thing. This is what the senator had to say.
In any normal trial, a judge would call relevant fact witnesses, witnesses with information directly relevant to the case. Joe Biden has zero information about President Trump's decision-making in the White House to withhold the aid from Ukraine, and all of the Trump administration's efforts to get Ukraine to interfere in our election. He just doesn't have any testimony.
All right, so what he was saying is if witnesses start, and Republicans, maybe you feel the same way, would want to talk to Joe Biden and or his son Hunter, it's not going to happen. So if it's a quid pro quo, I know that phrase is overused, Senator, they say no to that, then it sounds like we'll have no witnesses, period, right?
Yeah, so Van Hollen clearly is a partisan. Van Hollen wants the president impeached. But let's look at somebody who approaches this more objectively. Jonathan Turley is an attorney who's on the left of the political spectrum, but who thinks that the House does not have a case. And he also has said that if there are witnesses called, he actually does think that the Bidens would be material. So putting aside Van Hollen's incredible partisanship, no one's more partisan than he, and we take someone who's objective, he thinks if there's witnesses, again, we should bring in the Bidens. So I do think that this is an issue that cuts both ways, which is why I go back to what is the crux? Did the president release the funds by the time that he, by law, was required to do so? The answer is clearly yes. And so we'll go back to that basic fact and go from there.
Is a quicker impeachment trial the better route to go, or if it drags on, the more problematic route for both parties?
I think it is so important to get this over with. We need to be working on how do we lower the cost of insulin for the diabetic? How do we do things positive for the veterans in the United States? Keep in mind, as long as we are doing impeachment, we can do nothing else. So any hope we have to address surprise medical billing, something that I've been working on a bipartisan basis, and both the House and the Senate, to get something done, we don't get done as long as we're focused on this. I think we need to get through it, focus on the people's business, and then we have an election in 9 months where the people can judge, the American people can judge President Trump themselves.
Senator Cassidy, great seeing you again. Thank you for taking the time on a Saturday.
Thank you, Neil.
All right.